The scripture reading today comes from 1 Corinthians 13. You might recognize it. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part, then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, and the greatest of these is love. May God add a blessing to the reading of the Holy Scriptures. Will you join me in prayer? Lord God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Good morning. It is so good to be here today. The famous love chapter from Paul. How many read this at their wedding? There's a few. But less on, yeah, of course. It's a popular one, right? I don't use it a lot in my weddings, but I mean, there's plenty of room to use it in weddings, of course, because it talks about love. Paul wasn't trying to pen the greatest love poem or even highlight the romantic love between two people. Paul's not really doing that. I mean, it's still really good to use at weddings, but Paul was trying to make a different and I think much deeper point about the life-giving movement of Jesus. Paul was attempting to reorient the Corinthian churches by getting back to basics. There was some serious dysfunction in the church communities in Corinth. People were very disillusioned with their faith. They would meet for worship and share a meal, but because of the conditions present, the conditions that they were dealing with, the people were not experiencing abundant life. Quite the opposite, in fact. So Paul is saying, hey, let's stop all this. Let's drill it all down. Let's drill every single thing down and get some perspective. And when you strip everything down, the pomp and circumstance, and peel back all of the layers, love should be at the heart of everything. Tongues and prophecy and knowledge and faith and belief. If it ain't love-based, you toss it, according to Paul. It's a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. So I thought this particular lectionary passage was fitting for our time right now. There are a lot of people in this country, in our community, and in this very room that are currently disillusioned with their faith. Mark my words right here. Mental health will dominate the headlines for the next several years because we have gone through the awfulness. We've been through some awfulness, and we are still going through some awfulness. Like it or not, we are dealing with trauma right now. Now, naming that seems to freak people out, but shying away from the definition does not make it any less true. And there's lots of factors that have contributed to this trauma. Number one was the pandemic, of course. But there's also so much more: the escalation of political tensions, the escalation of racial tensions, the distrust of media sources, and the hatefulness that erupts when just a mild disagreement occurs. All of that and more have left everyone affected by what we have gone through and what we are still experiencing. Everything looks different out there now. Everything feels different. And if you're not willing to see that, then lie to yourself if you want. But the rest of us have to recognize that we are not in a good way. Church looks different now. This sanctuary looks different now. Look around. Do you see the empty chairs? There's lots of empty chairs here. And are you watching from a screen? When you were here 22 months ago, that feels different to you, doesn't it? I'm glad that we can offer worship services where people feel comfortable. That's awesome, but it feels very different. And we need to acknowledge that, in fact. Also, as long as we're being honest about things, this pandemic has led so many of us to be disillusioned with our faith. But there were many who were already feeling that way before all of this madness. In Oklahoma, we boast about having churches on every corner, and that is about accurate. And yet, we have some of the highest horrible statistics in the country. Incarceration rates, and teen pregnancies, and child food insecurities. But if there's a church on every corner, it doesn't take a math genius to know that something is not adding up, furthering the number of people who are becoming disillusioned with their faith. And apparently, this is the day for honesty, so let's keep going. The church universal, the big church, in its present form is dying. It's been in decline since the 60s, but we can really see those numbers playing out now. The pandemic has exacerbated this and accelerated the timeline for closure. But before the pandemic, 9 churches a day closed in the United States on average. In the 1990s, there were less than 10% of the population that claimed no religion in our country. Today, that number is above 25%. And the number's even bigger among young adults. 40% of young adults in this country claim no religion. It's not like they don't claim church, they don't claim any religion at all. If you're quick to blame the younger generation, you are looking in the wrong place. That's on us, friends. And let me be very clear. The Jesus movement will continue. The Jesus movement will absolutely continue. But we are all starting to see through the noisy gongs and the clanging cymbals. People are craving authentic community right now, based in love. And they can see through the muck and the mire and the emptiness that sometimes institutional religion provides. If it's not love-based, they are not interested. Take communion, for example. This is my favorite part of the entire worship service, right here, this communion table. And I really like the way we are doing it now, by the way. I love how we are doing communion as a church. I mean, I'm down there talking to people, slapping people on the back, giving people hugs. I'm interrupting people's prayer time and quiet time with God, but I can't help myself. I like being around you people. Most of you, anyway. Sure, look at my dad when I said that. But communion in the ancient churches, like the ones in Corinth, was a meal. It wasn't a wafer and a shot of juice. It was a meal with the community and a way to feed people in poverty. Think about that, because everyone was invited to this meal. It was a meal that we invited anyone to come and share in breaking of the bread. It was a way to feed poverty. But now in many churches, it's a wafer and a shot of stale grape juice. Here at Forest Park, we are so proud. I am so proud of the fact that our communion table is open. I highlight it every single week. Everyone should come and get communion. It is open to everyone. And yet, from the outside, it still looks like a piece of bread dunked in some juice. Communion is meaningless without love. What are we doing to ensure that our weekly ritual, our beloved weekly ritual, is not just a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal? The Bible is another aspect that can be used with or without love. In the days of the abolitionist movement to end slavery, the sermons and churches in the South that supported slavery really had the Bible on their side. I'm not kidding. They had the better biblical argument to condone slavery. They were using the Bible to back an institution where we bought and sold people. And here's the deal, again, they had the better biblical argument. The abolitionist side basically had to state that they disagreed with that part of the Bible. And in the 1800s, that is not a great place to be. And yet I wonder what Jesus would think of using something so holy for something so profane and evil. I mean, it's more than a noisy gong at that point. It's straight up evil. The Bible, I love Scripture. I love swimming in the waters of Scripture. But the Bible is meaningless unless you approach it with love. And what about the belief in Jesus? This seems to dominate the way you express your Christianity here in the 21st century. I believe in Jesus. I believe that Jesus is God's Son, born of a virgin, without sin, and was the sacrifice for my sin. Any challenge to that particular set of beliefs sends people running and screaming. It freaks people out to challenge anything in that way. But Paul is saying something different. Paul is saying, I don't care what you believe, as long as love drives the entire thing. Believe or don't, but love has to be central. And that's Paul talking. I'm not totally certain how we shifted from action to belief. But that sentiment, that belief sentiment, simply doesn't exist in the Gospels. The Gospels make it abundantly clear it is what you do that makes you religious, not what you believe. There's a great parable in Matthew from Jesus where a man had two sons. And the man needed help in the field, and so he goes into his house and he sees his two sons sitting there, and he says, hey, I need help. Let's go. Let's move it. And when the first son said, absolutely, Dad, I would love to help you, and I love you as well. But then sits back down and does not go help his father. The second son said, I'm not helping you. Leave me alone. And then goes out and helps. And Jesus ends the parable by saying, which one actually did the will of the Father? And Paul follows that up with his teaching and says, examine your beliefs. If it doesn't propel you to love, then it is meaningless. I don't care what doctrine you're pulling from. If it doesn't propel you to love, it's meaningless, according to Paul. And there are so many aspects of our life that become meaningless if love is not the root. Sex is meaningless without love. Marriage is meaningless without love. Friendship is meaningless without love. And life is meaningless without love. Love is what makes all of this work. And you know, here's the deal. As an example, I've never cared one bit when my kids were in elementary school what they were learning as far as knowledge goes in the classroom. I really didn't care. I didn't care if the teachers taught them arithmetic or how to read. I wanted my kids loved and valued. Knowledge will come. I wanted an environment where my kids were seen and loved and valued. Because we can teach the kids how to read and write and add and subtract. I mean, we did that, in fact. I mean, goodness sake, we read to them all the time. We did puzzles. We showed love in that way. For goodness sakes, Mary Frances would buy workbooks for the children to do in the summer. In the summer, man. She got them for everybody. I still haven't done mine yet. It's not completed. Knowledge will come. I want my children loved. And that's why Rebecca Peterson is up for Teacher of the Year. You think she doesn't explain the fundamental theorem of calculus better than the other teachers? I mean, maybe she does. I don't know. But that's not why she's up for Teacher of the Year. It's because she loves her students. And it shows day in and day out. And like Kim came up here and read earlier, it's not that God likes love or that God operates out of love or that God is loving. God is love. There is no distinction between God and love. So to engage in aspects of faith that leave love behind is to leave God behind. So if the communion table does not propel you to love, then we probably need to get rid of it because it's just taking up space right down here. It would be meaningless if this room, if the baptistry, if the paramount, if this entire worship service doesn't propel you to love, then we need to free up our Sunday mornings here and do something different. We got to find something else to do because it would be a noisy gong. And if the Bible does not propel you to love, then quit reading it. Because if you're not going to approach Scripture with love directing you, don't approach Scripture. There have been some awful things that have done in the name of Scripture when love is taken out of the context. It would be a clanging cymbal. If this faith that we are all a part of, if this faith does not propel you to love, then you need to ask yourself what you actually have faith in. Because God is love. And if this church, if this movement is going to survive, then it must ground everything in love. If it doesn't line up with love, it does not line up with God. I don't care if you're using the Bible or songs or prayers or creeds or doctrines. I don't care where you're getting your information from. If it's not love-based, it is meaningless. And let me be perfectly honest with you as well. We're trying to figure out how to do church right now. Going forward, we've had meetings upon meetings. How do we do church going forward from this space? And there are churches all over the land asking that very question right now. How do we do this thing called church in our current climate? And I have racked my brain, and I have done prayer sessions, and I have been on my knees, and I simply trying to find and discern the answer, but the answer is more simple than I probably want to acknowledge. Love is the only thing that matters going forward. Right belief, right doctrine, right social stances, right worship style, it's all meaningless without love. That's what Paul was desperately trying to tell people. And it's a message that we all need to hear. And so when you hear 1 Corinthians 13, when you hear that, I want you to not be nostalgic as far as weddings go. I want us to really listen to the words when Paul says, if I speak in the tongues of mortals or of angels, but do not have love, then I'm a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers, and I understand all the mysteries of the universe, and I have all the knowledge and all the faith as if to move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. And if I give away all of my possessions, even my body, so that I might boast, but do not have love, I profit nothing. For love is patient. Love is kind. It's not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. Love is not irritable or resentful. It rejoices in truth. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing. And of course, it believes all things. Love believes all things, bears all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. You see, love doesn't end. Now, as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. Knowledge will even come to an end. For we know now only in part, and we prophesy only in part. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child, and I reasoned like a child. But when I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. Now we know in part, but then we will know fully, even as we are all fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, and the greatest of these is love. Thanks be to love, who is God. Amen.